Sun in the 8th house, identity and transformation. Welcome to Sun in the 8th house in Synastry. In this overlay, we explore what happens when one person's sun, their core identity, vitality, sense of self, and life force, falls into another person's 8th house, the house of transformation, shared resources, depth psychology, sexuality, death and regeneration, and the hidden dimensions of existence that most people spend considerable energy avoiding. Where the 7th house governs the encounter with the other as partner, the 8th house governs the encounter with the other as agent of change. It is the territory of what is buried, what is merged, what is surrendered, and what is reborn. It is not a house that does anything gently, and when someone's sun lands here, the relationship it generates tends to carry a quality of intensity that is recognizable even to those with no astrological framework at all. The sun person brings their identity, their light, and their fundamental sense of self directly into the space where the house person manages their deepest fears, their most carefully guarded secrets, and their relationship with power, intimacy, and change. They do not arrive at the surface, they arrive at the root. And the root, in the 8th house, is where things that have not been examined in a very long time have been quietly waiting. From the house person's perspective, the sun person may feel, from early on, like someone who sees through them. Not in a violating sense, necessarily, but in the sense of an uncommon perceptiveness, a quality of attention that reaches past the persona and touches something more fundamental. The house person may find this compelling, unsettling, or both simultaneously, often in alternation. The 8th house does not produce neutral responses. It produces responses that are felt in the body, in the nervous system, in the parts of the self that precede language. There is frequently a quality of compulsion in this overlay. The house person may find themselves drawn to the sun person with an intensity that they cannot entirely account for. A sense that the connection is important in a way that exceeds ordinary attraction or compatibility. This quality of compulsion is real, but it is worth understanding what it consists of. The 8th house activates unconscious material, and what feels like fate is often the self-recognizing in another person, a catalyst for something it already knows it needs to go through. The sun person tends to feel this intensity as well, though they may experience it differently. They may find that this person draws out a quality of honesty and exposure in them that other relationships do not. Their identity, which ordinarily maintains a degree of conscious management, finds in the 8th house environment a pressure toward authenticity that it cannot easily resist. The sun person may disclose things in this relationship about their fears, their history, their most private experiences that they would not typically share and may not entirely understand why they are sharing. Sexuality, when it is part of the connection, tends to be significant in this overlay, not merely pleasurable in the 5th house sense, but genuinely transformative in the way that the 8th house understands transformation, as something that requires a degree of dissolution. The merging that the 8th house calls for is not comfortable for every sun placement, and the sun person may find that intimacy here asks them to surrender a degree of individual definition that their identity is not always willing to release. Power is a recurring theme in this overlay, and it is worth addressing directly. The 8th house is the house of power dynamics, of control, of leverage, of the subtle and not so subtle ways that people in close relationship exert influence over one another. The sun person's identity, placed in this territory, becomes a factor in the house person's psychological power landscape. The house person may idealize the sun person and then resent the vulnerability that idealization creates. The sun person may find that their influence over the house person is greater than they intended or wanted, and may not always handle that influence with the care it requires. Jealousy, possessiveness, and the fear of loss tend to surface in sun in 8th connections more readily than in others. These are 8th house preoccupations, the shadow side of the depth and merger that the house also makes possible. When both people are able to bring these responses into conscious examination rather than simply acting them out, the relationship becomes a genuine site of psychological growth. When they are not, the same intensity that made the connection so compelling becomes the primary source of its difficulty. Shared resources, financial entanglement, inheritance, mutual investment may become relevant in this overlay, and they carry the same quality of complexity that all eighth house matters do. Clarity about what belongs to whom and what is genuinely shared is not a romantic concern, but a necessary one. At its highest expression, this overlay produces one of the most genuinely transformative connections available in synastry. The Sun person finds a context in which their identity is not performed or managed, but met at a depth that makes surface-level relating feel, by comparison, thin. The House person finds a presence that illuminates the very places they have most needed illumination, the buried, the feared, the long avoided. And that does so with enough warmth that the process, however demanding, feels survivable. When this works well, both people emerge from the relationship changed, not damaged, not depleted, but genuinely altered in the way that only the deepest connections manage to alter a person, with a clearer understanding of what they are made of and what they are capable of sustaining. At its core, Sun in the 8th house in synastry is about what we are willing to let die in ourselves for the sake of what might be reborn, and whether we are brave enough to let another person witness the process.
This was Sun in the 8th house in synastry overlays. Thank you for listening. Next, Sun in the 9th house.